Hello and welcome to the Say Yes to Holiness podcast. I am streaming live on Sunday, March 2nd, and we are just a couple of days away from beginning Lent. Ash Wednesday is on Wednesday, and getting kind of excited actually about Lent. Yeah, I'm one of those weird people who actually enjoys the Lenten season. So, one of the biggest things I want to do though is that want to jump back on. Been out of pocket. Took some well needed rest and recreation. Spent some time with good friends and had wonderful conversations and praying together. And it was a really good time. Also got to spend time with my aunt and uncle, which was a great joy as well. And yesterday, I jumped on to YouTube and did kind of a live stream of where I talked about some of St. John of the Cross's wisdom that he gives us for the spiritual life. And I figured, hey, why don't I just use some of those things I was talking about yesterday and just go a little bit more deeply into them today as a way to kind of prep you for Lent a little bit. But speaking of Lent, I would be remiss if I was not to advertise a little self marketing here that I'm doing another Lent audio online book retreat this Lent. We're going to be starting on Tuesday, and so you can just go to say yes to holiness.com, and there's a link there, and you can sign up, and then you'll be getting everything that you need. I will be posting each of those segments onto both my YouTube channel and my podcast throughout all of Lent. So you're going to see a whole bunch of content, but it's really going to be my reading from the book, a little short reflection, and then a resolution for the day. So if you want some help being able to get through this Lenten season with some most wonderful, wonderful wisdom that's given to us by Cardinal Francis Xavier Nguyen Van Thuan, then I really invite you to join me. So without further ado, let me jump into today's food for the head, heart, hands, and feet, all from St. John of the Cross. Food for the head. He tells us the further you withdraw from earthly things, the closer you approach heavenly things. I think this is a perfect place for us to start our Lenten journey, is us realizing that our withdrawing from earthly things and focusing upon more heavenly things, then we're going to be approaching God, because God is of heaven. He is all that is good, true, and beautiful. So, one of the biggest things that we can do as we enter into this Lenten season is for us to remember the opportunity that we have. And Holy Mother Church, this is one of the great pieces of wisdom, regardless of what problems you might have with the church. And believe me, when I tell you, I am fully aware of all of the many problems and challenges that there are within the church institution. By the way, let's continue to pray for Pope Francis. So, whatever God's will for him at this time, may that come about, and may he be ready for whatever that is. But let us pray for him. So again, the further we withdraw from earthly things, the closer we're going to approach heavenly things. So during this Lenten season, look at it as an opportunity for you to set aside some things that might have kind of gotten out of control a little bit in your life. Those things that are keeping you from prayer, those things that are keeping you from, being disciplined and fasting from not just food, although that is a part of the Lenten discipline. On Fridays is for us to abstain from meat. And also on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, we not only abstain from meat, from not eating any meat, but also we fast. And very simply, we fast by not snacking during the day, having one full meal, and then two small ones, which would make up that full meal. So you're getting, food during the day, but you're fasting from indulging and from anything that, again, might be keeping you from approaching heavenly things. So Ash Wednesday, interesting little fact here, and hopefully this doesn't keep you from going to Mass, but it's actually not a holy day of obligation. Interesting, isn't it? Because Lent shouldn't be looked upon as obligatory. It shouldn't be looked upon as this terrible thing that we have to do. Rather, Lent should be looked upon with gratitude. Here's an opportunity for us to withdraw from earthly things so that we can draw closer to heavenly things, just as St. John of the Cross tells us. So as you're looking at this Lenten season, kind of change your perspective. If you're looking at it like, gosh, Lent, rather look at it with gratitude, with the opportunity for you to set aside those things that really aren't important. They really aren't. Those things that we get caught up in, our latest binge watching, whatever our exercise program might be, or, and those things are good. We need to be attentive to our health. We need to be attentive to, making sure that we're enjoying things, especially if it's a good series that helps us be able to reflect upon ourselves a little bit more fully. But my point is that fast from those things, withdraw from those earthly things that are probably keeping you from being able to draw closer to heavenly things. So I'm not going to keep, kind of banging the drum here, but look at Lent as an opportunity. Be grateful for the opportunity, and then see whether or not your perspective of Lent doesn't become more in line with what St. John of the Cross tells us is very important for our spiritual journey, which is to withdraw from earthly things so that we can approach heavenly ones. Our food for the heart. St. John tells us that whoever flees prayer flees all that is good. Oftentimes we flee prayer because we say, I'm too busy, I don't have enough time, that it doesn't do anything for me, I'm not feeling anything, it just seems like I'm just sitting there and I'm not hearing anything, I'm not feeling close to God. We come up with all sorts of excuses. But the fact is that whenever we flee prayer, whenever we do not spend time in prayer, we are fleeing all that is good. And God is all good. So when we don't pray, we're actually running away from God. And we have to ask ourselves a question: why? Why am I running away from spending time with the one person who loved me so much that he created me from love, in love, for love? And he loves me so much that he thinks about me all the time so that I might continue to exist. Now, thinking about that, the omnipotence and the grandeur and just who God is, that can be overwhelming and that can be frightening. But we don't need to be frightened of God. God isn't sitting there with his little book, in the sky going, you messed up here. I'm going to get you for that. That's not how God works. Jesus came and told us this. That's what the parable is about, the prodigal son who did the worst thing ever. He told his dad, hey, Dad, give me all of my inheritance now. Pretty much telling him, I wish you were dead right now. Give me all my inheritance now. And then he goes off and he fritters it away. He spends it on loose living, to use a term. He spends it on, to use a more real term for us, he spends it on drugs, sex, rock and roll, and party, party, party. And eventually he runs out of money and he has to try and fend for himself. And he has to go work at a pig farm, which for a Jew was like the lowest of lows because swine were unclean, which made you unclean. So you're now like an outcast in society. And eventually he becomes so hungry that he's like, my father's servants are treated better. I'm going to go back and I'll tell my father I'm sorry and just treat me as a servant and I'll be happy. He's gotten his perspective squared away, hadn't he? And he comes back, and what does the father do? Well, number one, the father's has been looking for him to come back for years. He's been looking for him and he sees him from far off And what does he do? He doesn't wait for him to get to him. He doesn't wait as he trudges across the fields and up the road and comes finally to the house and then encounters him. Rather, he runs to him. He runs to his son and he embraces him. And in the face of his son saying, "Father, I've sinned against you and against heaven. Please forgive me." The father is already calling for bring a ring, put it on his finger, bring a cloak for him, put sandals on his feet, and go kill the fatted calf because we're going to celebrate tonight. That is our God. That is your God. That's my God, who loves us so much. So whenever we flee from prayer, whenever we come up with all of our little pitiful excuses, and believe me, I do them too, okay? But whenever we come up with our pitiful excuses for why we can't spend time in prayer, we're actually running away from God. We're running away from all that is good and true and beautiful. We're denying ourselves the love and the care of the Heavenly Father. So, keeping that in mind, as we are getting ready to approach this Lenten season, how are you going to not flee from prayer? How are you going to resolve to spend time with all that is good? How are you going to spend time with God and make that a priority for your day? Not as a shoehorn it in, but how are you going to recraft your day so that God and spending time with Him, especially in prayer, becomes the thing, becomes the only thing. In fact, there's a phrase, the one thing necessary. Jesus talks about this when Martha comes and complains to Jesus about how Mary is sitting at his feet rather than helping her with all the hospitality duties. And Jesus says, I'm not going to take the better part from her. She has chosen the one thing necessary. Let us also choose the one thing necessary to bring us joy, but to bring us into the presence of all that is good. Our food for the hands is conquering the tongue is better than fasting on bread and water. Conquering the tongue is better than fasting on bread and water. Wow. In our world today, of where most of the time we don't think about what we say, but rather just say it, this is a hard one. How often is it that we hear a little bit of gossip and can't wait to share it with somebody else? Or we're a little envious of someone who's had what appears to us good luck, or they get credit for something that maybe we did, and we want to bring that person down and go, yeah, they didn't really do that. That was really me. How often do we have to refrain or apologize because we've used harsh words with those who are closest to us? How often do we speak partial truths? We don't speak the full truth so that we look better, or we spare someone's feelings because it's a difficult truth to speak and we don't want to take the time to craft our words and to speak them with charity, to speak them with love. So conquering the tongue is probably the best thing that we can do for all those around us. And John the Cross tells us it's better than fasting on bread and water. Now, when we think about the saints, for example, at least I do many times, we probably envision someone who's an ascetic, they barely eat, and they're fasting on bread and water because all they need is God. Well, the fact is that the closer we draw to God, the more we will realize the beams in our eye. That was, this weekend's gospel, is the fact of we can see the little, sticks in somebody else's eye, but we can't see the wooden beam in our own. And the fact of the matter is that the closer we draw to God, the more that we set aside those earthly things and draw closer to heavenly things, and the more that we spend time in His presence, the more we will see ourselves for who we truly are. And our words, in particular, are fruit, good fruit or bad fruit, from the goodness or lack of goodness that is in our hearts, that's in our souls, that's in our interior life. This is why conquering the tongue is better than fasting on bread and water. One of the biggest things, and it's a practice that's helped me over time, is called the 4 S's. And I've shared this before, but I think it is a good one to come back to. And the 4 S's, especially if we blurt out stuff, is a good way for us to kind of gain some control. And the 4 S's are, the first is stop. So you begin to say something and then you realize, oh, and so you stop. You then spend some time in silence. So instead of saying something, you stop and you're silent. You don't say something. Stop, silence. Third, swallow. In other words, we take in what we were going to blurt out. We take it. And the 4th step is we suffer. And this is not punishment. Rather, this is us accepting the pain that we were going to give to someone else, even if we don't think it was going to be painful. But we're able to identify those things. So practicing those 4 S's, to stop, silence, swallow, and suffer. That helped me conquer my tongue. Is it totally conquered? Absolutely not. Because all of us have those things in our hearts that we have to tend to. And that's the reason why prayer and spending time with our Lord is so important, is because when we do that, then He's able to shine that little spotlight and go, ooh, you need to work on that. That's going to bear bad fruit. That's going to not be a good harvest. You need to refrain from that. You need to adjust that. We need to root it out. And this is the whole purpose of Lent. So as a resolution, look at, and I gave you one way that you can approach it, but conquering your tongue. All of us can conquer our tongue in some way. All of us have a particular tendency to gossip or to slander or to, harsh language. All of us have a tendency towards something in which our tongue is not conquered. So make that a resolution throughout Lent. And know that it is better than fasting on bread and water. It doesn't hurt to fast on bread and water. But look at conquering the tongue and see whether or not that isn't the greatest act of charity that you can do for your brothers and sisters. Our food for the feet. St. John tells us, the humble are those who hide in their own nothingness and know how to abandon themselves to God. I'll say that again. The humble are those who hide in their own nothingness and know how to abandon themselves to God. Probably one of the greatest challenges that people will talk to me about is exactly this. How can I abandon myself to God's will in my life? How can I do that? I talk about the 4 steps to righting ourselves and getting focused upon putting God first in our lives and being able to fully say yes, therein say yes to holiness, but to say yes to God's invitation to become like Him. The first, of course, is spending time in daily prayer and meditation. The second is to receive the sacraments frequently, particularly Eucharist and confession. Third is to try and grow daily in virtue. And the fourth is to abandon ourselves to God's will. And many times people will be like, how do I do that? I try to do God's will, but I don't hear His voice, and I struggle to know what His will is, what my will is, etc., etc. Well, one of the best ways that we can abandon ourselves to God's will is to understand who we are not. We are not God. God is God, and we are not. I am not God. You are not God. But yet we spend our days acting like God, don't we? We're like, God, I got this, no problem. I don't need any help. So we presume that we've got it until we don't. But, we go through our day as if we are God. We judge others. We think that we're self reliant. We believe our own press. We believe that we're doing great and everything's great. But the fact is that when we recognize our nothingness, when we recognize that I can't control politics, I can't control what's going on in the world, all I can control is myself and my movable square meter. In other words, that, foot around you where you wander to each and every day, wherever we are, that's the only thing you can control. When we recognize this, then we are beginning to become humble. We're emptying ourselves of ourselves and allowing God to come and to fill us with Himself. That's the whole purpose of prayer. And when we are truly humble, we hide in that nothingness. St. Therese of Lisieux is known famously for her little way, and for right reason. And it is because she was like, I'm just a tiny little flower. I'm not a beautiful rose, or, I'm just a tiny little flower. But the fact is that by recognizing our nothingness of how little we are allowing God to cultivate in our hearts what St. John the Baptist talked about, which is, He must increase, I must decrease. And Lent is that opportunity for us to decrease, for us to be able to set aside all of our presumption, all of our pride, all of our beliefs that we have got this, that we don't need anybody or anything, and I'm going to change the world. No, you change the world by changing yourself. That's why Lent is such a great gift. Lent is that opportunity to be able to change yourself, not in a self-improvement project, but by allowing the Lord to come into your heart and to be able to transform it, so that then we become like the great teacher, so that we then reflect Him. He must increase, I must decrease. And how we learn to abandon ourselves to God is by hiding in our own nothingness, recognizing again, God is God and I am not. And that's okay. So I hope that you have enjoyed this little podcast this morning. A little different than I have before, but wanted to definitely share the wisdom of St. John of the Cross. He's such a brilliant, brilliant man that we call him saint for a reason, is because he became like his wisdom, of where he hid in his nothingness and he abandoned himself to God's will. And God's will was that he shared the wisdom that had been shared with him by God with us, so that we can turn to it, so that we are able to draw ever closer to God and set aside these earthly things that really don't matter in the end. I hope that gave you hope. And one final little plug. If you're looking for some hope, come join me. Go to sayyes.holiness.com, click on the link there, and I'll see you beginning on Tuesday as I move through The Road of Hope by Cardinal Francis Xavier Nguyen Van Thuan. And we share this journey to grow in hope during this Jubilee year, as Pope Francis has called us to be pilgrims of hope. And I hope and pray that whatever you decide to do for Lent, that it be truly fruitful and it be a truly grace-filled and blessed time for you. Know my continued prayers for each and every one of you today and each day, that you may be given the courage to do whatever it takes, so that together we can tell the Master of Death, not today. God bless everybody.